It says on the sign out front that my message this morning is a question. What is the spirit of this church? But the truth is, we already know what the spirit of this church is. Love is the spirit of this church. We declare it every single week. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. But in this week, when it is Valentine's Day, when it seems love is plastered on every nook, every corner, every square inch of every store and every part of our lives, it seems like it's worth asking the question, what kind of love is the spirit of this church? We proclaim this spirit of love every week, but to truly understand what it means here, in this place, in this gathered community, you have to stick around long enough to see how we live out the spirit of love. You have to stay long enough to see how the love that we proclaim is a love that has the power to transform ourselves and the power to transform the world. And sometimes it's helpful to remember that there is an aspirational power to saying something even if you're not quite sure you're on board yet. I've heard a few folks tell me over the few months and weeks that we've been doing this service now, it's been about 6 months, and especially some of our newer folks and folks who come to this service mention that it feels a little bit uncomfortable sometimes to say the words of this congregational covenant of ours. And if that is you, and you are here this morning, I want to assure you that it's okay, that it's fine. We understand and we know something about where that discomfort comes from. We know that there are people for whom the word spirit is a word that is a marker of something that you might have left behind a long time ago and might not be interested in welcoming back. I know that there are people in this congregation, people in this service in particular, who respond to the word covenant, who don't really care for the word covenant. And if that's you, that's also okay. I want you to stick around, though, this morning. Stick around long enough that even if you don't change your mind, that you at least consider it. You see, it seems to me that there are at least two places in our congregational covenant that are more likely to give pause to someone who identifies as a humanist. Those two places are the words covenant and spirit. And since we say those words each and every week, it seems like every once in a while we might do well to just stop for a minute and ask ourselves what it is that we mean when we say them. In a congregation that is as theologically diverse as this one, where we have this service, and we have our traditional 10 o'clock service, and we have our praise and worship service at 11:30, we not only know, but we actually expect that our members will from time to time feel some level of discomfort. It is in some way a sign of personal growth when we are able to be in a place and in a community where we are not constantly and always affirmed by people who think and believe exactly as we do. It is something that we live out. People coming together in community who use different kinds of ritual and language. And all of our members and friends in this congregation come with individual histories and heritages, stories about what churches and religion has meant to them in their lives. And what I know is that of all of those members and all of those friends and all of those people who are reached by this church, that the folks who are most likely to have disagreement with some part of our covenant are those at this service. This service tends to have more of that drawback than the folks that are more theistically inclined tend to have. And it's certainly true, I want to be clear, it's certainly true that there is something that is very traditional and very religious that's attached to the word spirit, that's attached to the word covenant. And one of these days, I promise I will bring you a message about understanding covenant as a humanist. But this morning I want to spend my time on this question of spirit. What is the spirit of this church? Not only because it's on our order of service and something that we say each week, but because this month you might be aware that the theme at All Souls is spiritual practice. And you might know also that February is African American History Month, as Tamara mentioned. And you might have figured out already this morning and in every store and every place that you go that it is Valentine's Day this week. And so I want to just give one last warning before I descend into the rest of my remarks, that if you have not yet made that purchase for Valentine's Day, Quick Trip on the way home is not the place to buy it. This is a service in which we can consider what it means to have a spirit of love. And in this month of African American history, I also want to consider what it is that I, and perhaps you, if you share an identity with me, might learn from our African American brothers and sisters. I, as a white person who grew up in Kansas, amongst immense privilege of many sorts, believe that we are asked sometimes to reach out, to say, what is it that we might learn from someone whose experience is different than our own? So, before we get to all of that, let me open up this word spirit for us. You see, the word spirit catches us. It catches people who identify as humanists so often because it is a word that carries with it a lot of baggage. There's a lot of places where just saying the word spirit is accepting a definition that spirit is a supernatural phenomenon. For people like most humanists who live in a naturalistic, monistic world where the laws of physics and chemistry apply everywhere and at all times, something that is supernatural simply cannot be. Supernatural doesn't exist. There is only the natural world and universe. Supernatural has no context, no meaning, except for perhaps in the world of fantasy. Spirits and spirituality then become the realm of make-believe, the realm of fantasy. And for many non-theistic humanists, it's really clear that there is just no meaning in those words. But context matters, and in the context of the spirit of our covenant, we discover that we are not talking about ghosts or other disembodied beings. We are saying that love is the spirit in the same way we talk about the spirit of the Roaring '20s. The roaring sense that life was good and that times would go on well forever. That the women were wearing scandalous clothing, and you might even see a knee if you looked really closely. There were speakeasies and big bands, and spirit comes up in this way a lot in our lives. Team spirit. It becomes kind of the zeitgeist, that ineffable thing. And it's the thing that holds us together. The thing that holds together this otherwise disparate group of folks who share space, who share time, and who then form community because of it. William Murray is the former president of the Unitarian Universalist Seminary in Chicago, and no, I know you're wondering, he's not the son of Madalyn Murray O'Hair. But nonetheless, he is a religious humanist. And he's written extensively and widely about it, and he argues in his book that you don't have to have spirits to have spirituality. And he wasn't talking about vodka either. He was talking about being part of something that is bigger than we are. Something that is bigger than our individual lives, our individual bodies, and being part of something that is so much greater than we are or can ever truly comprehend and understand. And acting as if that matters in our lives. So this morning, my message works from the assumption that love is indeed the spirit of this church, that spirit is a word we can claim in this congregation, in this community, even in this service. But that part of what has gotten us all tripped up, not just at this service, but across our community, across our country, has been the way that we have been confused about what it is that love means. Part of the reason that so many of us are confused about love is because we have gotten very mixed messages about love and power. A few weeks ago, Reverend Tamara shared a powerful message based on some words from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. In it, she shared these ideas that what is needed is not just love, but love and power. Love and power needing to work together. Dr. King didn't say it this way, but what he meant was that everything in our lives needs to be modulated. It needs to be moderated by its engagement with something other than itself, just as we need to be moderated and engaged by those who are different than us. Too much of any one thing on its own is a danger. Dr. King said that love on its own was sentimental, anemic. But he also said power on its own was destructive and dangerous. If you just read the quote, you might conclude that he was arguing that love was always weak. But that's not what he said at all. What he said that was love that was commonly understood. The way that love is put out in this week of Valentine's Day, the way that love is presented is so often, but not necessarily, sentimental and anemic. True love in this context is much more than just red paper hearts, however touching they are when your 4-year-old makes them for you. True love is more than this model of always giving away that is often presented. True love is more than the vapid lust and attraction that is presented in popular music and song. That it is not, in fact, love, however exciting it might be in the moment. So the love that we proclaim as the spirit of this church is neither sentimental nor anemic, because in this congregation we know something about the dance of love and power. The way that love is present in any relationship where there is a rebalancing, a shifting and an adjustment of power over time and in different circumstances. The way that things shift and change as our lives shift and change. Now, I know from my own life that love is a powerful force, a life-changing force, even a life-saving force. But I also know that braising up such a view all too often means being dismissed specifically because of this sentimentality. You need only bring up love in polite company to discover how quickly love itself is dismissed as weak, as ineffective, as powerless. Love becomes something that's maudlin and for little girls. It's something to dream about, but hardly the stuff of real life, and certainly not a life-changing force. And yet behind all of those comments, I always suspect that there is something of what Bell Hooks wrote about in our reading this morning. A yearning for love once had and lost. Or perhaps a yearning for something that seems so far out of reach. A longing that we push away. Push away because the idea that we would ever find it seems too unlikely and unreasonable. Far too difficult. It can be easy, much, much easier, to admit that we want something and can't have it if we are in a community of love. But absent that, saying, I want this, I want love in my life, but I don't know how to get to it, can feel lonely and painful and difficult. But yet, each week, we proclaim in this church, in this congregation, the life-changing power of love, even though we know that it is not always seen as life-changing or powerful in the world. The power of love is the power to enter our lives and not just only transform us, but the power to actually transform the way that we engage with the world. And to do so in a dance with power, moderated and modulated by power. And I know that I learned so much more about this when I first became a parent. I learned something about true love, the love that sustains families and churches alike. That love that is rooted in affection and care and recognition. Yes, all of those things. It is rooted in that, yes, but also rooted in respect and commitment and trust and open and honest communication. These are words about the way that love gets modulated by considerations that are bigger than we are, more than just what we want, more than just what looks good on the runway this week, so much bigger than we are. And it is in all of those balancing acts, all of that shifting matrix of our lives, in human relationships, that we grow and change. Now, perhaps I learned it earlier on as a parent. I'm not quite sure, but I think it's possible, because I started out as the parent of a child who was already partially grown. Many people have the advantage of coming to parenthood sort of over time and with a fresh new child, carrying the seed of life inside your body, or tending to your partner as you watch the months go by, waiting patiently until this new child comes in. For families that start with that kind of relationship, that start at the very beginning, it is easier to assume you don't have to know who the other person is. They're just a baby, and their capacity to express themselves is limited, though powerful at times. I, however, did not start out as a parent in this way. You see, I started out as someone coming into a relationship with a girl who was already nearly 4 when I started dating her mother, the woman I eventually married, Emily, whom many of you know. So I started out as a parent, as the parent of someone who was already formed, at least partially, someone who had her own personality, her own history, her own will. Yes, her own will. I won't tell those stories from the pulpit because you know her. So I had to recognize, if I was going to be a parent, that I had power in my life, but so too did she, small though it was. And so it became incumbent upon me as a parent to walk into this love by getting to know her, getting to know who she was and what mattered to her. As I walked into the life of this little girl, I was faced with the difficult and often contradictory demands of being a responsible adult, caring for a child who could not yet care for herself, and also recognizing that I had to do that work of relationship building, of tending and growing, not just with my future wife Emily, but with my daughter Olivia. Things were good, and I assure you of that. We wouldn't still be together 8 years later if they weren't. But there were times when it was tough, times when there were challenges, and times when I thought things should go a certain way. And I was the only one in the household who thought that. There were times that I had to assert a level of power and authority to be the responsible adult. And there were times when I had to step back and let Emily be the responsible parent, because she had a relationship with Olivia that was already years old. She knew how to work with her. And so I had to learn, as we all do in our lives, to learn where power lay. And while doing so, let the love that was present grow in my family. Because in families, as in congregations, as in communities, as in every part of our lives, disagreements will inevitably arise. And in those difficult times, you need to know. I needed to know. We need to know that there is enough behind our relationship, enough depth of love to sustain us. And of course, it's not just me, right? We all do this as we learn to navigate new relationships. We learn to say out loud what our hopes are. We learn to say what our expectations are. To stay present even when it is difficult to hear. Difficult to hear that there were expectations others had of us that we didn't meet, or expectations we had of others that we didn't know we had. They were just the way things are, or are at least supposed to be. To be a family like the family that Bell Hooks grew her adult family into through long and difficult work. The family that found a way to ask for what it needed. Not the family of Bell Hooks the child, who just watched the love fade and disappear, who felt left alone and wondering what had happened. What I mean to say this morning is simply this, that if love is the spirit of this church, then this tradition of ours leaves us not with the question, what is the spirit, but another question. The question, can we trust each other enough to share the power and relationship in this congregation? Can we give and take and dance on the floor together, following at times the same steps, knowing when it is our turn to lead and when it is our turn to follow? Setting aside those old stories for the moment when it's necessary. The way my mother had to learn to set aside her childhood training in dance when there hadn't been enough boys in the classroom. And on our wedding night, I went to dance with her, and she pushed to lead instead of follow. So the question is, can we agree that for our love to actually change the world, can we know and listen to the music that's playing? Can we tell when there's a two-step playing and when it's the Cupid Shuffle? Can we shift and dance with each other instead of running into each other? It's what I learned as a parent, and though I had far more power, far more responsibility as a parent than my daughters do, I also had to learn when it was my turn to teach and be the power and authority, and when to step back and learn. It is my job to learn. It is my job to listen when my 11-year-old daughter does, as she did last week, come home from a school assembly and teach me how to dance it Gangnam style. And it is equally important for me to then be able to turn my attention to my 4-year-old daughter, who proceeded to teach me how to dance it princess style. Love and power are navigated in every relationship, and love is worth giving our lives to and living out in this world, at least a love that knows this process, this give and take. It's a love that is worthy of our devotion and care because it transforms us and the world in the process. People come to this congregation, people come to All Souls wanting more. They want people who will be with them, who will hold them, who will grow with them, who will be there to challenge them from time to time. Love is no easy thing, in spite of what the fairy tales would tell us. The happily ever after always includes a pile of dirty dishes and laundry in the basket to be done. Work that shifts and changes over time. And that is where the love that is most worthy of our dedication emerges. In loving and trusting relationships, service and peace and truth and help are part of what we all come to expect, as well we should. And in those relationships, each of us knows when it's time to step back and let something new emerge. Our congregation is a training academy for life, a place where almost unlike any place in our lives, we get to bring our whole selves, our minds and our hearts, our bodies and our brains, so that we might grow in love and service to the world. Love is truly the spirit of this church, and service is its law, and because of that commitment, our members go into the world each week carrying with them the spirit of this place, and they come back each week to renew their own spirit, and the spirits of those who walk through the doors carrying the burdens of unknown joys and concerns. Love, as Bell Hooks so poignantly noted, is a powerful thing both in its presence and its absence. And so this week we say again that however much we might stumble along the way, Love is the Spirit. May it be so.